Right. Good evening, everyone. Picking up from where we left in the last class, we finished Buddhist philosophy and the associated important areas for Prelims 2026. In this present class, what we will be dealing with is using Jaina philosophy as the main point. We are going to look at current affairs from geography standpoint, literature standpoint, and some legal issues. In order to completely appreciate all these issues, you need to understand the underlying logic, look at the historical sites, and then you will be able to appreciate the specific current affairs much better. How many of you know this Santara? The practice of Santara or Sallekana? Why are they fasting? Fasting is a concept that is prevalent in every religion. But why does it take so much prominence in Jainism? We will understand today. All right. So let's start from the basics. Okay. So what is the objective of every Indian philosophy? Suffering. End suffering. Yes? Clear? Now, the Jaina philosophy begins with a presumption that there is soul. What is the nature of the soul? Just like in Vedanta, which is when the soul reaches Brahman, it has a state of eternal bliss. Satchit Anand, Satchidanand, as it is called. Here also, the soul is conceptualized in a similar way. So, question. Does Jaina philosophy have room for the concept of soul? Yes or no? Answer is a clear yes. Because everything begins on the presumption that there is a soul. Okay? Why is soul assumed, etc.? Let's not get into that, because if you get into that, you will move into the domain of philosophy optional. We'll not go there. Let's stick to the presumption that soul exists. Clear? Now, if a soul exists, how does it get into a scenario where it is suffering? This is the first point you need to know. And how to stop that from actually transpiring into an endless chain. This is where Jaina's philosophy comes into the picture. Let me explain this with this small kind of a cartoon. Look at this. See, if you have imagination, you can use AI to good use like this. It can help you memorize things faster. So do not shy away from using AI. Okay? I just visualized this and I gave this. So using AI depends on your ability to imagine things. How do you want to present it depends on you. So do not shy away from AI, because AI is not a source of information, but to make your life easy here. Take a look at this. So if a soul is supposed to end that suffering, Jaina philosophy says that it has to pass through certain steps. Firstly, they believe in this concept called ashrava or ashrava. So in the original conception of soul, it is supposed to be very light and does not have any impurities within it. It is, when I say light, it is almost weightless. Just like in the modern day conception of the fundamental particles. You heard the word God particle? What is this God particle in particle physics? Higgs boson. A similar conception is there for soul in the philosophy of Jainas. So it is everywhere. The world out there is made of this soul which is pure, but when you have passions within us, you attract karma. So here karmic attraction, as it is called, like the just like how a simple body, moist body, will attract dust. Dust will settle on this moist body, right? So if it is having that dust settled on it, it becomes sticky. Just like that, in the conception of Jaina's philosophy, you will have this ashrava where you will get into karmic bondage. The soul gets into karmic bondage because of the karmic dust. If you are angry, if you are sad, if you are showing any sort of an emotion, you attract this. Unless and until you stop that from happening and clear yourself from all that, you will continue in this cycle of birth and death. This is the philosophy of Jainas. So once this starts getting more and more, you will enter into bondage. So once you are entered into bondage, you get addicted to this pleasure, and that will create a sense of cycle of birth and rebirth. You might be taking various bodies. Once you might be born as an animal, once as a plant, once as an evil demon, or sometimes as a human being. But unless and until you do not realize that you are getting attached to it, the cycle repeats, and that is called bandha. Then you realize, okay, so we have Jaina teachers telling us that, see, this is why you are in this cycle, so you got to stop doing this. That's where you realize and try to take some vows, Mahavrata, Pancha Mahavrata, as it is called in the concept of Jaina. You try to stop the new particles from getting attached to your soul, and then the new ones stop. But what about the ones that is already existing? Look at the difference here. It was pure, now it is completely, in mud. So how do I get rid of that? In tapas, this phase is called nirjara. You are trying to clean yourself of the old mud. Once you do that, you attain moksha. In our language, it's called moksha, but in Jaina philosophy, it's called kaivalya. The same thing is called nirvana in Buddhism. In Jainism, it is called kaivalya. Once that happens, you as in the soul, will reach something called siddhashila. So where siddha means you are stable. It's an abode where all the souls will stay forever happily. Once the soul reaches that stage, it is called a state of the knowledge of that soul is keval jnani. And such a person is called Jina, who conquered. The word literally means who conquered the battle against this karmic attraction. Clear? You understood the entire cycle of Jain philosophy? It begins with Ashrava, Bandha, Samvara, Nirjara, and finally Kaivalya. These are the various stages of life. Clear? Now, here you must have seen the concept of Anekantavad, Syadvad, etc. that we discussed the other day. Okay, where do they fit into the picture? You must have already seen this KFC, right? Faith, knowledge, faith, and conduct. Okay, just for our memory's sake, let's remember it like this. Where will this concept of Anekantvad and Syadvad actually fit into the picture? Let's see. In this case, you're telling that you have to carry out 5 vows. Okay. What are these 5 vows? Okay. The 5 vows include Satya, Ahimsa, Asteya, Brahmacharya, Aparigraha. What does these words mean? If you are finding it difficult to remember, let's use this mnemonic. Anyway, the movie is releasing, Raja Saab, if you can remember that. Satya, Ahimsa, Asteya, Brahmacharya, and what is the other thing? Aparigraha. So these are the 5 promises you as a Jain give to yourself that you will refrain from doing all of this. You will not steal, you will not indulge in any addictive bodily pleasures, you will always speak truth, you will be non-violent. So these are the fundamental principles that will guide us. So any textbook will give you this list, you can by heart it. But the difficulty is, if you don't understand the purpose in the entire philosophy, you will get stuck. There can be deeply conceptual questions in this area, and that's the reason I am elaborating it here. So once this phase is over, you will be able to overcome it, right? So in this path, you're talking about the word ahimsa. Ahimsa can again be 2 types. We spoke about suffering, various kinds of suffering. What are the various kinds of suffering? Adi Daivika, Adi Bhautika, Adhyatmika. So when it comes to Adi Bhautika and Adhyatmika, it has got to do with mental suffering, both from others and self. Clear? So when I say non-violence, imagine you have a fight with your friend, a very bitter fight. Do you think it is violence? No. As long as you feel that it is not involving any fist fight, you think it's non-violent, it's completely okay. But how disturbed would you feel when you fight with your friend? So ahimsa, according to Jainism, is of 2 kinds. 1, physical, and 2, intellectual or mental. To ensure that Jainas have a spirit of tolerance and acceptance, I would rather say acceptance, to solve that problem, to make sure that their spiritual journey is not clouded by ego, these concepts of anekantavad and syadvad, they came into the existence. One, like I told you, philosophy has metaphysics, epistemology, and ethics. 3 different branches of philosophy. Now, when you talk about the metaphysics, what is metaphysics? What is the reality that is existing in the world? So, for example, cosmos. Here, Jaina says that there are many things that are existing in the world. Okay? So, that is the idea here. There are many things that are existing in the world, and how can we know them? Through Syadvad. So, strictly speaking, this is about language, linguistics, but anyway, we'll equate it to epistemology. How can you know about the manyness of reality? When you accept you have your limitations. Only then you will have multiple viewpoints and you will agree to those multiple viewpoints to construct a new reality. Okay? If you don't agree, you are basically attracting karmic particles because of your passion, that is ego, which is again a sin in Jaina. Okay, these are the 5 vows. Anyway, so imagine a situation where both the parties are extremely egotistic and they're having a fight. Imagine there are 2 friends who looked at a mountain from this side. That person is seeing the top and saying that okay, the mountain is white in color, and from this side, the the second person is seeing and say, it's green in color. Both are equally true. But the ego that only I am right, you are wrong, is anger, which is a form of violence, which is attracting that karmic particle. So this is not desirable. So what is the Jaina solution? They say Anekantavad. So let's see. It's okay. Maybe both of us are right. There can be many aspects to reality. Let's accept that. That is what Anekantavad says. Second, how do you know this manyness of reality? If you agree that there are multiple viewpoints and change your language. The word here, syad. Syad, as in Hindi, you can see shayad. Maybe. Okay? Maybe you are right. Maybe this is correct. Maybe this is correct. When you are accepting that viewpoint, it opens up a room for discussion which creates a new solution. So there is no hurt feelings, no ego, nothing. You're not attracting any karmic particles. You're basically seeking truth. So when you're talking about this philosophy of Anekantvad and Syadvad, you are accommodating in nature. So we are slightly digressing here from prelim standpoint. Tell me where you can use this philosophy in your essay, ethics, any application based. Extrapolate it. Persuasion in ethics, okay. Tolerance in GS1. Conflict management. Article 19, freedom of speech. Dissent. What is the place of dissent in a democracy? To see that there are conflicting viewpoints and objectively grow together. Maybe we will see a new dimension of that truth which was not discovered. If you take a look at the jurisprudence, even in legal logic, jurisprudence means legal logic. Even in jurisprudence, there is the spirit of this Anekantavad, where what is Anekantavad? Nothing but scientific temper. That spirit of Anekantavad is visible in multiple places. If you have to give a judgment on, let's say, the Babri Masjid, the Ayodhya Ram Mandir verdict, what did the court say? The court did not discard the problem of either of the parties. One side of the party got another piece of land to construct their mosque, and here the major party, like, because of the ongoing conflict, historical proofs, it is treated as a civil dispute, not as a dispute between two communities. And by taking that stance and accommodating this spirit, they settled the issue. Now take a look at the doctrine of essential religious practices. Are you aware of that? What is that? If you are considering any religion and you are saying that this is a fundamental aspect of my religion, there should be some test to accept that this is acceptable, this is not acceptable. There might be diversity in our practices too. To accommodate that diversity, you need to have a viewpoint of accepting and accommodating all those viewpoints. You can see the same logic here also. Clear? So, actually there is a lot of commonality between the original Vedic tradition and the Jaina thought. In fact, you would see Rigveda referring to the first Tirthankara, Rishabhanath. Why? Because they might be contemporary. Just like in Vedas, where we don't know how the original text came into existence, even Jainas didn't know the original existence. So you have to see this cultural parallels. Clear? So this topic discussion is not just contained to prelims part. You have to extrapolate this logic to GS1, tolerance in Indian society, GS2, legal logic, judiciary, GS3, ecotourism. Okay? Because the next points that I will be discussing will give you a context of why I'm bringing up ecotourism. GS4, ethics, values, religion as a source of universal values. You can think on all these lines. Okay, for that reason, the legacy of this philosophy is very important. Clear? Let's move forward. Now that the philosophical understanding is closed, we will go again. We'll come back to the prelims part. I told you at the beginning of the lecture, we will be dealing with some aspects. One, the geography aspect. I am here bringing the concept of sacred geography. Sacred geography refers to, see, you can find this in geography usually in the context of tourism. Why do you think people go to Ayodhya, Tirupati, or Prayagraj, Ujjain, or any other place? Why do they go to such places? Isn't it because of religious reasons? So, when you're tracing the evolution of a specific religion, it is prudent, because of the nature of questions that UPSC is asking, it is prudent to see how the associated places in different points of time grow in prominence. Okay, so if you establish a timeline of how Jain philosophy developed in India, you can associate those developments to two aspects. Actually, three aspects, I would say. Broadly, three aspects given how UPSC questions are evolving. What are the 3 point of references or 3 metrics that I'm using? 1, political. 2, language. And 3, place. Okay? Let's say, if you are taking the timeline as the point of reference, 5th century BC, and as late as 17th century. Broadly speaking, Jain philosophy development as we see it today will be broadly placed on this timeline. So, at different points in history, starting from 5th century BC till now, what places became important, what language was used for respective literary works, and why. If you understand this, your prelims preparation as far as this topic is concerned will be closed. Let's understand the logic. 5th century BC, or let's say even before that, 6th century, 5th century BC. What is the time period? What is the predominant political attribution? What label would you put here in our history textbooks? Mahajanapada period. Then after that, Mauryan kingdom. Then what next? So you wouldn't see any development in Jain philosophy in this time period, not until the 5th to 10th century. This is one phase, and another phase is 11th century to 16th, or let's say 17th. 11th century to 17th century. Okay? In different phases, if you look at how the literature evolved, that literature will explain other things. In the initial phases, like I told you, just like in the case of Vedas, Jaina philosophers didn't have a specific, I would say, source of this knowledge. It was passed on through an oral tradition, one Tirthankara to another. It was passed on in generations. Okay? So, in the initial days, when they were trying to documentation was mostly in the oral form. What is the original philosophy of Jaina? They said there are many things that are existing in the world. So initial literary sources or oral traditions after the 24th Tirthankara, that is Mahavira, what happened was they were trying to explain how the world existed. So initial phases was all about this cosmos. So if you see any work in the initial days of Jainism, they will be talking about what this world is made of. Surya Prapatti, or I will get back to the sources, but I will tell you how to identify. See that literary tradition also evolved with time and the political conditions. The first set of works would talk about how the world existed. What language would you likely find here? Sanskrit, Pali, or Prakrit, or Pali. Pali is confined to Buddhism. Prakrit, or I would rather say Magadhi. Magadhi, Ardha Magadhi, all these are variants of the same script. There are dialects, I would say. Ardha Magadhi means it's a slightly polished version of the language that the masses spoke at that point of time. So I would say Prakrit. Why Prakrit? Don't forget the origin point of all the Nastika schools. Nastika schools came out as Shramanic tradition. Who is a Shramana? Shramana means someone who is wandering, is an ascetic. So you're trying to spread the message of knowledge from one place to another, and in that Shramanic traditions, you would club all this Nastika schools, including Buddhism, Jainism, Ajivika cult. You know what is Ajivika cult, right? There is another small. What is the difference between a cult and a religion? Cult, sect, religion. What is the difference? But why that difference? Why can't, what is the difference between? Okay, let's take this as a homework. Tell me the difference in the next class. The difference between religion, cult, and sect in terms of the way it is organized, the legitimacy it gains, and the methods through which it gains that legitimacy. Okay? Then what is the difference between cult and a sect? Let's get back to that in the next class. Now, anyway, coming back. So, as far as the language is concerned, in the initial phase, you will have Ardha Magadhi or Prakrit. As and when the sources are gaining patronage of the kings, what language would you likely find? Sanskrit. Some Prakrit to Sanskrit. Again, if the work is supposed to be a pan-India language, it is Sanskrit. If again the regional kings are, encouraging it, the language would again shift to local languages. But as and when the time period increases, progresses, not increases, we will start with cosmos, and the literary sources will be moving away from cosmos. They will be talking about the places associated where Tirthankaras walked, or they will be attaching that to the holy geography. Then from that phase, they will be talking about the embedded philosophy in literature, where mind itself becomes a temple. You have to meditate upon that, okay? And the literary sources will reflect the development in the political conditions also. Now we will be looking at that. So, if you take a look at the sacred geography, we will divide it into three different parts: ancient, medieval, and late medieval, or I would say modern. There is nothing much in the modern phase, so for our sake, late medieval. In the initial phases, like I spoke, we were focusing on cosmic vision, like say Jambudvipa. Okay. Here in this phase, the texts refer to what we know today as Bharata. Okay. Next is the focus on the pilgrimage sites. There are some important current affairs also in the last 5 years associated with these sites. So that is the context in which I am giving you this backstory so that you can take an educated guess. Just by looking at the words, and if you know the backstory, you will be able to take an educated guess. Third one is medieval growth, where temple cities were focused. Like now, when you see grand temples getting constructed, you can automatically imagine that there is a political shift. Definitely, there will be some political patronage because it would cost a lot. If you come across any crowd funded grand temples in history, let me know, because I must have missed it. But if there are any, maybe I'll learn from them. Like, I don't know any crowd funded grand temples. So that can be a cue for you. Wherever you see grand temples, there is a attached political identity, because more or less the grandeur that is visible there is a sign of the political prosperity, the economic prosperity of that particular kingdom. Take any big temples, Brihadishwara, all the temples in the grand temples in the south, whether they are of Pallavas or Cholas, that's the case. Hoysalas, that's the case. Even Rashtrakutas, same situation. Either it is a symbolism of the prosperity or symbolism of the authority. Either of these cases or a combination of these two, whether it is in the north or in the south. And remember that it is always about legitimacy. What is legitimacy, guys? Legitimacy refers to acceptance. So in that time period and geography, what gives acceptance to the king? That defines your architectural or any cultural preference. Clear? Now, let's look at the historical works. I'm not asking you to by heart everything. It is difficult, I understand. But after this class, you should at least gain the ability to logically guess because of the backstory associated with it. Take a look at this image. In the initial works of Jainism, you would notice discussion on how the geographical elements, which are not actually real locations, there are some mythical or mystical geographical features discussed in some literary works. They associate the reality, like how the world would look like when you attain Siddhashala, when you reach there. So they were talking about places like Jambudvipa, Mount Meru. Of course, you have to understand that these are all metaphors. Okay, so you might say Mount Meru exists, Mount Kailas exists. In reality, you have to understand the importance of symbolism. They are taken as representatives of what they stand for. So from our imagination, and when they are describing, they are treated as equivalents. But in reality, in this world, they are talking about something which is not visible on earth, and just to make it palatable to the common people, they equated it with the names that we know. Comparison. Clear? So that is the topic of discussion here. Jambudvipa, Nandishvara, Mount Meru, cosmos, basically. How do you recognize the literary sources? Here, look at this word, Prajnapti. You would notice this Prajnapti as a keyword. Jambudvipa Prajnapti, Surya Prajnapti. And you would also see Tiloya Pannati in Prakriti is nothing but Prajnapti in Sanskriti. Okay? Whenever you see this word Prajnapti, it's like referring to some cosmic reality in the world of Jainas. Okay? So, this is how the early literature existed back then. I'll get back to it. Okay. After the initial phases are over, you would also see at later points of time, whatever was left out in the explanation of this world was also taken up by scholars in Sanskrit. There was also official patronage. One of that is Tattvartha Sutra. You have to memorize this. It's a very, very important text. This is there in Sanskrit. This is considered one of the most authoritative texts on the Jaina philosophy. So we'll have to remember this. Tattvartha Sutra by Umaswati. Please memorize this. In this work, he defined the cosmos as Lokapurusha. Like Jain cosmology was equated with this conception of Lokapurusha. You might get vaguely these questions. The idea behind it might be used. You can logically eliminate. So that's the reason I'm giving this. So there are various variants of the language of Prakrit. Sharaseni Prakrit, Ardhamagadi Prakrit, depending on regional variants. This is the western part of the country. That would be the eastern part. Magadha was in the eastern part. So you can see in the Jambudvipa Prajnapti the reference to the idea of Bharat. Again, for that reason, this will become important. There are no known authors who are attributed to these literary works. Whenever you see the word Prajnapti in the world of Jaina, it refers to the cosmos. That's all you need to remember. If you have the time and energy, you can memorize this. So this is the first phase of literary traditions. Why am I talking about literary traditions? Because literature and geography coexisted in the world of Jainas. Now, in the second Purana phase, just like in the Hindu Purana tradition during the Gupta age, Jaina Puranas also were developed in this time period. So you would see the biographies of individual heroes. That is the parallel tradition even in Sanatan Dharma, where you are talking about Vishnu Purana, Shiva Purana. Puranas was specifically talking about the backstory of individual gods or the values that they stood for. Same tradition was also visible in Jaina philosophy, which is not usually covered in our textbooks. So here also you will see Prajnaptis. But the difference is, in these works, individual heroes were worshipped. For example, in this phase only, you will see Adi Purana. This is a very, very important, famous work. Okay? Padmacharita and Adi Purana, these are two important literary works. In this Adi Purana by Jinasena, this was in language of Sanskrit, Rashtrakuta dynasty. You would notice it. Why you would see the growth of Jainism again in Karnataka? We'll get back to that. There is a geography reason to that. So you would see the life of Rishabhanath, who is the first Tirthankara. Who is a Tirthankara? Spiritual gurus in the Jainism. There are 24 Tirthankaras. The last one is Mahavira. Okay? So this work refers to Mount Ashtapada or Mount Kailash as the holiest site of his nirvana. So you're talking about geography, that is Mount Kailash, and a hero in that literary work, Rishabhanath. And this is a phase where you would notice that hero worship growing whenever there is patronage. This is the usual way of literary development. Clear? Now it is in this phase only you will notice various places in India gaining traction. One of the place is a place in Jharkhand. Some may Shikarji, Parshnath Hill as it is called. In multiple state exams, there was a reference to this place called Parshnath Hill in Jharkhand. So you are likely to get this question in sacred geography. Sacred geography is a theme that is happening in multiple years. Did you notice this question on Tirupati, Nashik, etc., etc.? It's a part of the sacred geography. Jaina sacred geography is something that was not touched till now, but often repeated in multiple state exams. Mount Abu. You are aware of Mount Abu? Right? Why are they asking about Mount Abu? Because the underlying theme is sacred geography. So, this is one thing. Sammed Shikarji. So, what happened is, way back in 18 or 19, somewhere around that time, the government gave a notification, state government said that it's okay to open up the space as a ecotourism spot. Jains were not happy with the decision and they protested, so much so that one of the Jain guru, in a protest, gave up his life, which forced the government to take back that notification and recognize this site as what it actually is. Holy site. Why is this site so important to Jainas? There are 24 Tirthankaras, and out of those 24 Tirthankaras, according to their literary sources, 20 of them attained Nirvana here or Kaivalya here. For that reason, it is considered to be extremely sacred, and this is not a secular site. This is not supposed to be a secular site. And this, owing to its culture and history, and our tradition of respecting the local traditions and the rights of the minorities, the government had to take a step back and declare that, yes, this site belongs to Jains and it is not meant for ecotourism. So, you have multiple state exams asking this question on Parshnath Hill. So, Parashnath Hill or Parshnath Hill, whatever you call it. Go and read the first paragraph of Wikipedia about this. Clear? You might get a question. How else can you get question? Let's say if there is a temple at this site, what is the building material that you can find? Why only that building material? It has got something to do with the geography. What kind of rocks would you find in Jharkhand? Nobody remembers except for the mines and minerals. Metamorphic, sedimentary, igneous. Why not igneous? Where are you more likely to find igneous rocks in India? Why? Hotspot activity. Then what about this region? Is this alluvial soil? Then if it is alluvial soil, if it is a plain region, why do you find so many tribes in this region? Your geography determines your culture. Think about it and tell me the answer in the next class. See, I can give you the answer, but unless you put some effort to find out the reasons for yourself, look at the map, understand the culture, it's unlikely that you will get more curious about these topics. So, the temple building phase is where you would see patronage from kings as well as merchants. In the later times, it is the merchants. In the earlier times, it is the kings. Especially Solanki dynasty, even during the Tughlaq dynasty, you had patronage. Again, remember that it has got everything to do with the concept of legitimacy. All the religious constructions had, at different points of time, some political context. Link it to the idea of authority and legitimacy. What gains traction amongst people? What gains acceptance? A lot of things will be overlooked when temple construction usually happens. Okay. So this was the era of temple building. The texts were written to encourage kings and merchants to build grand temples on those mountains, and they were glorified. Why on mountains? Can anyone tell me? You see some interesting coincidence in all the literary works. They were talking about mountains in Jain philosophy. Why? Look, go back to the Nirjara phase of, getting rid of your karmic particles. They were talking about penance. This penance, usually in Jain philosophy, happened on the top of mountains. Historically, all the Tirthankaras attained moksha or kaivalya on the top of a mountain because it stands for a symbolic peak. If you go into the depth of philosophy of Jains, there is a hierarchy of, you know, realities, and at the top, at the peak, is this Siddhashala. Okay, so it's a metaphor. To give traction to that metaphor, you will see a lot of places, temples, Jain temples built over these mountains. Okay, out of all those, this Parashnath Hill in Jharkhand is a very important one. Similarly, you will see Mount Abu built over, sorry, on the top of Mount Abu, you have what temple? In Rajasthan, Dilwara. Okay, why there is marble there? Geography, basically. Marble, temple, Jain, immediately you should think of. If you place this on a timeline, spatio-temporal analysis of history will tell you so much about the society we live in. Clear? So you will see these words, Kalpa Sutras. The minute you see the word Kalpa Sutra, it is a Jain text. Mostly, if there are any exceptions, if UPSC decides to ask those exceptions, please don't hold me responsible. I'm giving you the information you can by heart, but if you have a memory like mine, I depend on associative memory, so depend on the logic part. Okay, so Trishasti Shalaka Purusha Charitra by Hemachandra. This is a very important work and it belongs to Solanki dynasty. Where are you more likely to find this, fellows? Solanki's Gujarat. Vividha Tirtha Kalpa, another important work. This is a major travel guide describing major tirthas. It documents the destruction and rebuilding of temples in the Sultanate period. So this was actually in news a couple of years ago. There were citations in the Indian Express newspapers about the history part on Sunday. So that's how I found out this for the first time. You can go back and check once again. Okay. After that phase, you would see, this is not 5th, this is 15th century. You will see a scenario where instead of temples, they were focusing on paintings now. What happens is you have this Pattachitra or scroll paintings, like cloth paintings. On the top of that, they used to mentally map the temples and use them as a point of reference or objects of reverence, so that you may or may not be able to afford those pilgrimages, but at least you can mentally meditate upon this important pilgrimage sites, which tells us a bit or two about how that society was evolving. Why do you have to resort to this kind of scroll paintings? Maybe religious tolerance was not that high. This is the time period where jizya tax was there. Religious intolerance might be increasing. I am just asking you to think on the reason why, so that you remember this. Okay, Shatrunjaya Mahatmya and Hira Saubhagya. These are some of the important works in this phase where you're talking about the cloth paintings, where mapping of temples and the values that they stand for are captured here. Okay. Now, a small brief on the texts of Jainism and the important division and the sub-schools of Jainism. You all know the sub-schools of Jainism, broadly speaking. What are they? Digambara, Svetambara. Okay. But why did they come into existence? What is the story behind it? Let me explain that. See, Mahavir originally, see, it might look like Buddha, but I couldn't find a better thing, but just for your understanding, it's actually Mahavir. So he had a set of followers called Dhanataras. Okay. Their duty was to follow their guru, and they had this oral tradition. They were never documenting anything on paper. So the true knowledge that a Kevala Jnani gets after Nirvana or Kaivalya is passed on before he passes away to the Siddhashila, is passed on to the next generation of followers whose duty would be to spread the message, train the next generation, and pass on, so on and so forth. That's how it happened. And mind you, we are not talking about the first Tirthankara. This is the 24th Tirthankara. This tradition of Ganadharas existed much before Mahavira. But it gained traction in times of Mahajanapadas primarily due to the shift away from Vedic thought. Maybe we don't have a clear-cut textual evidence. Maybe the earlier Tirthankaras were coexisting with the Vedic thought. Because more or less you will see similarities in this Vedic thought. The only difference comes from the fact that social realities changed. Just like in that period where some people, some saints were not okay with commoners not having access to this scriptural knowledge, Shramanic tradition came into existence. Of them, Ajivikas, Jainism and Buddhism rose into prominence because of a combination of multiple factors, not limited to political patronage. Maybe if Ajivika cult had a patron, maybe that would have been a dominant thought process too. We never know. But having said that, this Ganadhara tradition over a period of time, they thought that this was not efficient. So the scriptures were not really present. It was present in the oral tradition and they were called agamas. Even in Vedic thought, you would find a similar name, Agama Shastras. They were eventually documented in one way or the other. But these philosophers, like the body of knowledge was passed on from one generation to another. At one point, there was a slight digression. And the last known Ganadhara, where all Jains accepted, his name is Sudharma Swami. So after this person, there was a great famine in somewhere around 300 to 400 BC. There was drought. The winters were extremely harsh. So the community of Jains, one of them decided that, you know what, like we will have to move away from this place if we have to survive in search of a better place. That sect became the southern traveling sect of Digambaras. Okay. So they came down to the region that is known today as Karnataka. Shravana Belagula, you will see the Bahubali statue in Karnataka because of this reason. So Bhadrabahu, who is the leader of that Digambaras, the ones who came to the south, was supposed to be the person who got that knowledge from Sudharma Swami. Actually, there are 14 texts, canonical texts, which will capture the Jain philosophy. And only someone who is considered a Keval Jnani will remember all of them. This was the last person, and after that, Bhadrabahu. But this person has left to the southern part of the country. The people who stayed back saying that we will have to figure it out here itself realized that the winters were very harsh and they started putting on clothes. They went on to become Svetambaras. Okay? Stulabhadra, as he is called, the head of the Svetambaras, and the schism, that this divide eventually fractured Jain followers into two different paths, namely Digambaras and Svetambaras. Clear? So the division is like, after a few years, the people who went down south came back north after the harsh winter and famine is over. And that's when they saw people were wearing clothes. And they started realizing that a lot of things changed. The lifestyle changed, and they start asking, why are we doing this? Here is where you will see that the leader of the people who stayed in the north, Stulabhadras, the Svetambaras, the leader noticed that the monks who stayed back, they were forgetting the Agamas. So they started developing and compiling those documents into a systematized knowledge, and they are called Angas. So the Svetambaras and Digambaras, both the sides agree to the fact that original text and original knowledge that was existing out there was lost in translation. The people who stayed back, the northerners, compiled almost 11 Angas, and the 12th one, this 14 canonical texts were supposed to be captured in 12. This 11 Angas were documented. Svetambaras claimed that we documented it. People who came back from south, they say that no, this is not what we knew it as. It is lost in translation. We don't agree with this. The 12th part, which is there, both the parties agreed that we have lost it in translation. So whatever is left is documented in this 11 Angas by Svetambaras. The rest is documented like at a later point of time. Digambaras also came up with their own texts. Okay, so when you see the words Agamas, Sutras, Kalpa, Anga, these are all related to, okay, the Jainism as a philosophy. This is what you should remember. So I gave this same explanation here. Now, if you have to pick up the most important previous year question facts, these are the things. 24 Tirthankaras are there. Ancient Rigveda mentions Rishabha and Arishtanemi, who are considered to be Tirthankaras. Rishabhadeva was born in Ayodhya and is symbolized by bull. So these are all facts picked up from previous year questions so that you can mug up. Parsavanath is born in Varanasi and is symbolized by serpent. Parsavanath teachings include the Pancha Mahavratas, 4 of them. Mahavira is the 24th Tirthankara who gave up the worldly life at the age of 30. Mahavira's mission was 12 years of sainthood and followed by 30 years of practice. He added the 5th vow of Brahmacharya. This sums up the Jain philosophy, the geography and respective literature. So I hope you go back and revise all of this. Give it some time. You cannot memorize it in a single sitting, but the logical part will help you to a large extent, I hope. That's it from my end. Of course, there's one more current affair. See this. I was talking about the Sallekana practice. Terminally ill 3-year-old fast to death in Jain ritual, and legal experts started raising this as a concern. So let me ask you this question. Does a minor child know what is death? So should you put that kid, no matter what that kid is going through, maybe that he or she, that baby is going through a terminal stage cancer, but does that mean the parents will have the right to put that kid in such a harsh, is a question raised by human rights activists. So you have this judgment of Nikhil Soni versus State of Rajasthan in 2015, which spoke about Sallekana being equated to suicide. But when you look at the Supreme Court judgment on the same issue, they took into context the Jain philosophy of Anekantavad. Just like how, see, the world we know takes suicide as an end. The Jain philosophy considered it as a pit stop because there is a world beyond that. If I have to respect that idea, I will have to allow a practice like Sallekana, which is accepting the manyness of reality. So, Supreme Court, looking at from the standpoint of Jains, accepted that I will respect this as a essential religious practice. Okay. But if you're equating with this suicide, if you're non-believer, then that's an issue. Will this apply to minors? That's a question we are not clear on. Can minors have the right to essential religious practices? That's a question which is like a blanket question mark that would be in front of Supreme Court in the coming days. This is a 10-year-old case. It might come back into picture soon. That's the context. Yeah, that's it from my end. Thank you.